Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the Mount of Transformation. Throughout this series, we are going to be looking at particular verses in Matthew 5, which is part of the Sermon on the Mount. Many people have asked me about these set of verses because we want to understand what Jesus was really saying here. But the problem is we have either been taught wrong about them, so they don't seem to make sense with who we know Jesus is, or we read them through our 21st century eyes. Either of these ways will give us a false understanding about what Jesus was saying here. So let's start by looking at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount with the Beatitudes. Matthew 5, 1 through 2 says, "When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to teach them." There are different aspects we can pull from these verses, but right now we're going to focus on two of them. The first one is this challenging message was for a small group of people, Jesus' disciples. They needed a shift from their Jewish perspective to a kingdom perspective, so they gathered around him to hear him teach. The second aspect is Jesus went up on the mountain. This is compared to Exodus 20 when Moses came down from the mountain with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments were the rules, the laws. These were the outward responses to God. But here we see Jesus did the opposite of what Moses did. He went up on the mountain to teach because this teaching was the inward transformation of a surrendered heart to another kingdom reality. So many scholars believe that these were to replace the 10 Commandments. So Jesus starts this message by saying in verse 3, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So here's where our shift in thinking comes in. We have been taught that to be poor in spirit, we are not to think too highly of ourselves in a spiritual sense. So this has led to self-condemnation and being self-critical. But that is not what poor in spirit means. What poor in spirit actually means is our entire being is dependent on God. Being poor in spirit opens the door to God and his ways because we empty ourselves of ourselves and fill up with God. Then we have access to the full kingdom, not just a part like grace and mercy, but the whole kingdom and everything that's in it. Jesus is our example of being poor in spirit. In John 5:19, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself unless it is something he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, these things the Son also does in the same way." So we see here, Jesus was poor in spirit. He didn't do anything on his own unless he first checked with the Father. Why? Because he emptied himself of himself first, so that God could do what he wanted through him. And that is the same thing that God wants to do with us today. So thank you for joining me on part 2 of the Mount of Transformation. See you next time.